Just gotta turn this off. Okay, just waiting for this thing to update. Then I'm going to post links for you. And by you, I mean like on my Discord and whatever. Okay, copy. Don't need you right now. Okay. All right, it is 3:06. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Streaming Parson Reads the Book of Genesis. And today I will be reading from chapter 42 till, let's see how far I might actually go. I'm not going to the end of the book, I'll tell you that much. Probably till, let's say, see, the problem is that, like, I might read up to chapter 46 and then save 47, 48, 49, and 50 for next week. That's going to be the plan. So today we're going to go from chapter 42 to chapter 46. Although the only problem, and you'll definitely notice this as we get there, it's going to feel a little disjointed. Just chapter 46 is like a bit of a tone shift compared to the more narrative parts early on. But we'll obviously talk about that when we get there. With that being said, I'm going to start us off with a word of prayer, and then you can follow along in, use a Bible app or Bible Gateway. I'm using the New International Version just for simplicity purposes, really. And with that being said, let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this time that we can be here and that we can read your word. And I just pray that you would reveal yourself to us and show us more of who you are and how good you are in our lives through the story of Joseph. I just pray this in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so my little preface, just before I actually start reading, just a little quick recap of last week, where basically we read through the first half of the Joseph story, which is like, well, really more like the first 2/3, really, where Joseph was sold off to Egypt, and then while he was there, he was successful in what he did, but he got caught in some scandals, rotted in prison for a bunch of years. But then, of course, he was later released because a servant of the Pharaoh remembered Joseph and his ability to interpret dreams. And so when Pharaoh was troubled by them, Joseph was able to do that. And Pharaoh basically promoted him to second in command. And then during basically 7 years of plenty that Egypt had, because what would happen was Egypt was going to have a bunch of years of plenty, 7 years of plenty, and then it was going to have like 7 years of famine, like really bad famine. And so Joseph had come up with this plan of how Egypt would survive the 7 years of famine. And so basically where we left off in reading, which was chapter 45, Joseph gets promoted, and then for 7 years he's, preparing for this famine. Of course, we get a little bit of his private life. He marries some priest's daughter, has a couple kids with her, and stuff like that. And then now, at the beginning of chapter 46, chapter 42. I don't know why I said 46. That's where I'm ending. Chapter 42, the famine has now struck, because in the end of chapter 41, that was the end of the years of plenty, and now we've entered the years of famine. So that's where we are now, starting in chapter 42. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Jacob's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land of Egypt, and the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "Well, from the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men. We are not spies." "No," Joseph said to them. "You have come to see where our land is unprotected." But the brothers replied again, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you. You are spies. And this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies, and we will put them all in custody for 3 days." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. I thought he was still talking. I got into it. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go home and take the grain back to your starving households. But you must bring your brother to me so that your words may be verified, and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. Then they said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen, and that is why this distress has come to us now." And Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of the sack. My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is, in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other, trembling, and said, "What is this God has done to us?" When they came to their father in the land of Canaan, when they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, "The man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us, and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men, and not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan.' Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, 'This is how I know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, so I know that you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land.'" As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me." Then Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back." But Jacob said, "My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." That's chapter 42. So chapter 42 is an interesting twist, right? So apparently, this huge famine that was, going to quote unquote destroy the land of Egypt, unless, Joseph did something, has apparently gone beyond Egypt and has apparently hit other parts of the world, at least in Canaan anyway. So this famine forces the brothers to go to Egypt. And of course, when you read that, you're like, well, you know what's going to happen, right? They're going to the land of which they sold their brother, and unbeknownst to them, their brother is basically like the second in command, right? The brother is like the head honcho over in Egypt next to Pharaoh, right? So, they go there, and it's kind of funny because Joseph is this weird moment where he acts a little bit petty toward them. And it's interesting because, when we were reading the last few chapters, Joseph is kind of seen as like this paragon of virtue, right? Like, he doesn't sleep with another man's wife. He's an honest man and all that. But here he kind of acts really petty. And I think the important thing to get from this is to understand that as human beings, and one of the struggles of human beings and why it's so important to be good to one another and to never break trust with people is because of stuff like this, right? So there's this interesting contrast that we see with the brothers, and apparently the brothers they must have learned something over the years, because apparently, they're pretty afraid of everything going on, right? First they meet Joseph, who they don't know is Joseph yet, and he's really harsh to them. And he asks this really high demand of them, right, to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin. And the interesting thing is that the brothers start realizing, or they think of like, semi-superstitious of like, oh, this may be the spirits having revenge on us, right? God is having revenge on us for what we did to Joseph. And here it comes, right? Because the old saying, what comes around goes around, right? I mean, every worldview understands that to an extent, right? What comes around goes around. And so, or what goes around comes around. I always get it mixed up a bit, but basically, in Eastern religions, the idea of karma, and of course, the Bible famously says you reap what you sow. Basically, the fundamental way of understanding this is that all your actions have consequences, right? And I mean, that sounds like, well, duh, on paper. But, as you live through life, and sure, you may do some things and you feel like there's no reaction right away. That doesn't mean that it might not come back at you at some point in your life. And so in the case here, this is years later. I think like 20 years later or something like that, right? Because Joseph was in prison for like 13 years or whatever. Or he was in Egypt as a slave for 13 years. And then we have the 7 years of plenty. So you add that, well, assuming that Joseph becomes the prime minister, basically, of Egypt, and at the beginning of the 7 years of plenty, if we make that assumption, then roughly Joseph's been in Egypt for 20 years. That's how long these brothers had to live with that guilt, right, of what they did to Joseph. 20 years is a really long time, right? And so here it comes, though, right? Even though it's been 20 years, these brothers realize, like, well, crap, right? Now that moment has come back to bite us, right? Because obviously they knew what they did was wrong. And the act of betrayal cuts deep. And it appears in Joseph, despite being, while he was in Egypt, he appeared as this paragon of virtue. But the betrayal had hurt him so much that even 20 years later, he still kind of brings it up and screws around with his brothers a little bit, right? And he's taunting them and all that. Because the Bible does say that Joseph remembers his dreams about them bowing before him and all that, right? And he understands that, like, it is that time. But, of course, how does Joseph go about it, right? He kind of makes fun of the brothers, and he's taunting them. And, of course, he wants something from them. He wants that recompense, right? 20 years, his brothers have stolen away his life. And he wants part of that back. And understand on the human level, of course, it's understandable, right? Like, of course, when if someone had hurt you and you had to carry that pain for that long, you're gonna want payback. That's just human nature. And we see a bit of that with Joseph, which I know is a little bit of a shocker to make that statement that, yeah, Joseph is acting a little bit petty, but I mean that's just realistic, right? That's just realistic. And that's another thing that people discredit the Bible of, where people say, well, it's not realistic. That's not true at all, right? When you see the way some of these people behave in the Bible, it's very realistic. It's very human. That this is how people behave. And, we can talk all the semantics and about how, yeah, Joseph was somewhat justified in being a little bit petty here. And, I mean, to be fair, his brothers did ruin a lot of his life for 20 years. Although, there is that little bit of a head scratcher that his son Manasseh means I forgot, or I have left behind the old life. And so, with his son Manasseh, and naming him that, you would think Joseph has moved on. But I think it's important that when you think of betrayal and how deep our own sins affect others, right? That they have these lasting effects, no matter how much we want to just let the past be the past. It's not easy, right? It's not easy. And, it's, as Christians would say, that's why y'all need Jesus kind of thing, right? Because only Jesus really has the power to truly let us let go. And even then, it's an everyday struggle. It doesn't just like you pray once and then Jesus makes it go away forever, that moment, right? It's a continuous battle to trust God that you have moved on and for God to guide you to keep moving on, right? And that's a way that I look at it, right? You don't just move on from something in the past. You have to keep moving on because the past will always try to catch up to you. Like here, right? Like it took 20 years, but the past eventually caught up. And in one way, it's inevitable, right? As much as we want to peer only to the future, the past will always catch up to you. You cannot escape it. After all, it is a big part of who you are. And so it's interesting that with Joseph, there's this realistic moment that when his past is caught up to him, all he can think about is the past. And yes, he should have moved on, right? He had the 7 years of plenty where everything was good in his life for a change. Second in command to Egypt, got married, had kids, He was the guy everybody wanted to be. But when the past caught up to him, you see him retreat back to that child he was, that 17-year-old punk, right? A little bit the 17-year-old brat he once was. And he's kind of reverted back to that because it is almost impossible to truly let go, and that is a big battle that every one of us must deal with. But at the same time, part of it is just that human satisfaction, right? I mean, this is the way you got to look at it, right? When people think about like any time you have a reaction to something, right? And the bad ways of going about it is like seeking revenge and whatnot. But ultimately, what we all seek whenever something happens to us, in any kind of injustice or wrongdoing, we ultimately seek some form of satisfaction, I think is the word for it, right? A satisfaction that will allow us to be appeased, right? And so this is why the sacrifice system essentially works, right? Why human beings sacrifice, right? Is that give and take understanding between human beings and the transcendent. But I think more often than not, we forget on the human side of that, and that the human being seeks satisfaction. Of course, the bigger challenge in the world today, I suppose, would be the balance of that, right? Because I think there is also such a thing as too much of the acquiring satisfaction, right? How far would I go until it is enough for me, right? For me to move on. How much satisfaction would I need before I can drop it? And, you know, one of the problems in the modern, like in the world today, is that we try to milk it for all, we try to milk it, right? Which is its own opposite problem. But when you read the Joseph story and Joseph acts this way, what I'm getting at is he is somewhat justified because he has a right to seek that satisfaction from his brothers who had stolen away roughly 20 years of his life. What else is there to say about this chapter? Well, just a few notes about how like Joseph basically starts this conspiracy, part of him acting super petty towards his brother, and he does his little conspiracy thing where he kind of plays around with their heads and makes them think that like God is punishing them, kind of thing, and that God is haunting them, right? Or something like that, right? And that's why they're so afraid when they find the money in their bags, right? Because, I mean, if you were to go to a store and you bought something and you found out you didn't spend a dime because all your money was back in your bag, right? You probably think like, this is awesome, right? I didn't have to pay for any of this stuff. But here, these guys are thinking like, oh, why is our money back in our bags? Like, are the spirits screwing around with us? Is God haunting us? Which is funny because you don't think of God and haunting people, but in the ancient world, this and definitely in the Bible, they actually had this idea that God could haunt people, and in a way, God screws around with people, right? In that way, and so this is why the brothers act the way that they do. They do think this, and there are other parts in like later parts of the Bible whenever like they see things that are like spectacular, if you will, and they think of like, oh, it's a ghost or whatever, right? And of course, there's certain Middle Eastern understandings of the world about how the spirit realm is the way that the spirit realm interacts with our world is not so disenchanted and separate like we tend to view it nowadays. But when you read this story in Genesis, you kind of have to remember that like, oh, they thought the spirit world very differently back then. And so this goes back to the whole like God is haunting them, and that's why the whole like finding their stuff is scary to them, because once again it's that whole like, oh, the past is caught up to us, so how bad is the bite gonna be, right, when it comes and bites you in the backside. One more thing to mention, I just want to talk a little bit about Jacob and his mindset and his attitude, if you will. And part of it is like, yeah, you can kind of get it from a human perspective, but on the other hand, there's like, Jacob does kind of do things over the top, and part of it is that he shot himself in the foot over these years. But it's how he's overly protective with Benjamin now, right? And the way that he treats, where his heart really is, right? Where is Jacob's heart really? And obviously, a big part of that is his love for Rachel, and that, some people may think, oh, it's romantic that he doesn't ever really let her go, and that he really loves her and all that. Despite his polygamous marriage, his polygamous life, right? But at the same time, it has become unhealthy for Jacob. And, part of it is understandable when Benjamin is the only thing left of his life with Rachel. He would do everything he could to protect that, right? But at the same time, this would weaken, well, not just Benjamin, for being oversheltered, but it would also cause a lot more disarray in the family. Which clearly, it's one of those funny things where like, well, part of it is because the brothers lied to Jacob, but with him losing Joseph, you would think that he would learn to love his family more equally and to treasure all of them in a similar fashion instead of this whole picking favorites. But at the same time, it can't really be helped because as human beings, we have a limited amount of love to give. That's just the way it is. Because we're not God, we can't love everyone. That's not humanly possible. Your ability to love is a resource, right? And we can only allocate those resources accordingly. And so, and before you think like, well, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, fellas, imagine telling your wife that you love her just as much as you love every other woman in the world. Let's see how far that gets you, right? Not very. Spoilers. Not very, right? And so, you think of like, one of the big, well, when some people would say like, well, if I had like 3 kids, I would love them all equally. Well, 3 kids isn't very hard, right? But saying like, Jacob's problem, sorry, with his huge amount of kids and the way that he had all his different wives and all the amount of people, you obviously see his ability to love run thin. And when he just gives that all to Benjamin at this point, it really stunts Jacob, right? And he's kind of, what does he do with his life? Because all he thinks about is just how to protect Benjamin. But in the long run, that might not do Benjamin good. Because all Benjamin would know is just the favorite treatment from his likely soon-to-be dead dad. So it doesn't put them in a good position. And of course, there's the possible resentment building from the older brothers. But of course, what the Bible kind of hints at is the older brothers kind of learned their lesson with how long Joseph's been gone. And one of the other things that the Bible doesn't tell us, and this is like conjecture more than anything, but perhaps like they had felt this haunting feeling for years, right? Ever since Joseph, they sold Joseph. They may have been haunted, if you will, for years. And so that may be another reason why their attitude is so different in regards to Benjamin, even though really Jacob treats him basically the same way he treated Joseph, right? But when it comes to Jacob's mind and him deteriorating too, because he's old now, and I mean it's easy for us younger people to criticize the old stuck in their ways, but at the same time it's just part of life that when you get older and your ability to care and protect others is waning, but at the same time that's all you think you can do, and it can be super stressful, right? And that's why you see Jacob act the way he does. That's all I have to really say about this chapter. Yeah, we're just gonna move on because we got a lot of coal to plow through. Alrighty, so chapter 43. Now the famine was still severe in the land, so it's still during the 7 years, obviously. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said to him, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again, unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, 'You will not see my face again, unless your brother is with you.'" And Israel asked, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" It's a good question. They replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' he asked us. Do you have another brother? And we simply answered his questions. How are we to know that he would say, bring your brother down here? Then Judah said to Israel, his father, send the boy along with us, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we would have gone and returned twice. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags, and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Sorry, I was just being a little itchy here. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also, and go back to the man at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So the men took gifts and doubled the amount of silver. And they took Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon. So the man did as Joseph told him, and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to the house, and they thought, we were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us, and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance to the house. We beg your pardon, our lord, they said. We came down here the first time to buy food. But at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. We have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks. It is all right, he said. Don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given your treasure in your sack. I received your silver. So he brought Simeon out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house and gave them water to wash their feet and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. I'm just going to change my seating a little bit. My chair is like breaking apart, so there's actually this towel at my butt to not over rub the thing, but at the same time you have to like readjust it all the time, and it's annoying. So it's like and I don't know if I can buy a new chair because it's gonna be expensive. But anyway, here we go. Where was I? Ah, yes. Verse 26. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then they said, And then he said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. As he looked and saw his brother, Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out, controlling himself, and said, "Serve them food." They served him by himself. This is weird wording. The brothers by themselves. Sorry, someone's calling me. It's my dad. Give me a second. Okay, sorry about that. But, gotta deal with life stuff when you're the only one at home. So, where was I? Okay. I'm gonna go back to verse 31, because the awkward wording threw me off there for a second. After Joseph had washed his face, he came out, controlling himself, and said, "Serve the food." So the servants served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. Because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's, so they feasted and drank freely with him. Okay, so first I'm going to use the whiteboard to explain a very oddly worded part in this passage. So let me just get the whiteboard. Whiteboard. My whiteboard. I love having the whiteboard. So if I have an excuse to use it, I'm going to use it. Oops. There you go. And there you go. And let's switch to display mode. Okay, so because I know this part was really confusing and that's why I read it twice. But this is in verse 32 where it says, "The servants served him, Joseph, by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians cannot eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians." So basically, let's pretend this. Oh, come on. Let's pretend. I better check what this is. Okay, it's just some spam mail. It's like, come on, guy, come on. Okay, let's get this out of here. Okay, so Joseph, let's pretend this is this rectangle, this terrible rectangle, is Joseph's like dining hall or whatever, right? Oops. Let's pretend this is Joseph's dining hall. This square rectangle thing is Joseph's dining hall. Now, Joseph would have the master table. So this would be Joseph's table. But TB for table. And Joseph's table would only have like, because remember, if Joseph's like basically the prime minister, he would frequently have guests in his house. And so they would have to obviously be separated, right? So Joseph's table would have like himself as like the head of the table. After all, he is like the Lord Master of this place, basically. And then his wife and his kids would probably be here, right? So this place would have like 4 seats, right? So it'd be Joseph, his wife, and his kids. And then basically, the Egyptians and the Hebrews would have to be split up, kind of like this, right? And so, like, I don't know, the Egyptians would be over here. We'll put E for Egypt and H for Hebrew. And then, you know, the 11 brothers would kind of be put over here, right? So the oldest one would be over here, and Benjamin would be over here, and then, like, Joseph would have easy ability to see him. So this is B for Ben. I'll just put Ben, I guess. And Reu, short for Reuben, would be over here, and then all the other brothers, right? I don't know why I did lines. That just makes it look really weird. But you get the point, right? So all the other brothers would probably be lined up, like, you know, along over here or whatever. And then, you know, all the Egyptians, like, you know, Joseph's employees would all be over here. And they would not associate with the Hebrews. And of course, you know, there were like cleanliness issues and foreign issues, I guess. You know, oh, somebody's gonna say it, you know, the R word, right? Oh, racism. Egyptians don't eat with Hebrews, right? Because they think the Hebrews are inferior or something like that, right? Well, whatever the case might be, not particularly important. But, I mean, this is how they did things in the ancient world, right? Like, you don't eat with, like, the foreigners, right? You just stick with your own people. And then Joseph's family would always have their own table, right? Because, you know, Joseph is the Lord Master of this, like, giant house, basically, right? So him and his family would always have their own table. And then Joseph might, you know, he might have an easy vision to see his brother, right? Because obviously Joseph, he's really happy to see his one full brother after all this time. And then all the Egyptians would be over here. So this is what the passage was kind of getting at. This is how they would have been divided up. Nothing too fancy, but that's basically it. I think that's it I have to say about that. So I'm going to put this away now. What else is there to talk about in this passage? Not much, really, because a lot of it's pretty straightforward. You know, the brothers eventually convince Jacob or Israel. See, the Bible does it too, where it goes back and forth their names, so I can't help but go back and forth with Jacob and Israel. I'm going to get rid of this because it then makes my face glow, because it's like a white screen, right? And the light from the screen. And the white light makes it glow. So I'm going to just turn it back to the darker screen. But anyway, you know, it's funny, you know, the Bible's not totally clear how long it took for the brothers to run out of food, right? And for them to need to go back to Egypt, whether it was like a couple weeks or something. Which then makes you wonder, like, Simeon had been sitting in that prison for a while, right? Several weeks. I assume several weeks, that makes the most sense. It wouldn't be like a month, that's kind of long. Definitely not years. There's no way, like, one food trip would have you enough food for the year. But I wouldn't say it's as few as, like, a few days, right? Because then obviously you wouldn't survive, right? If you had to buy food every few days, you know, travel to the next country over to buy food every few days, no way they would survive, right? So it'd probably be a few weeks later. And they may have put it off too, which leads to a longer time period, like more like 2-3 weeks is what I'm looking at. Because obviously the brothers would have put off going back to Egypt and getting more food. Because they knew, right? They knew that, like, well, we can't go back unless we bring Benjamin, right? And of course, Jacob's all like, no, I'm not going to let you bring him. You crazy, right? I'm not letting you do that. But of course, like, eventually Judah convinces Dad, like, look, man. Look, Dad, if we don't do this, we're going to die here, right? And would you rather we just all died here, or are we gonna take this chance, right? And eventually, Jacob has to concede, right? He's like, well, I guess you're right, because if we all starve to death, then Benjamin would starve to death, and then we all die, right? So, okay, that's obviously not a good option, right? So, it just stands to reason that, Jacob would have to let Benjamin go, and even though he's like all against it and everything. But it was more like an act of desperation. But of course, like obviously God is using this so Joseph can be reunited with Benjamin, because of course a big part of the story in this weird semi-twisted way, if you want to go that far, Joseph gets his justice, right? And that's ultimately what the story is coming down to, is that Joseph will get his dues, because he is a guy who trusted God, but for so long nothing went right for like a pretty long time. Although by the 7 years might be a little different, right? With the 7 years of plenty. So anyway, not much else. The dad comes with this idea. Why don't we try and bribe the guy? Once again, the typical man response to problems. You buy him out. So that's part of Jacob's plan. Like, well, bring all these gifts just in case, right? We might have to bribe the guy for his mercy. Which is funny because, I mean, that's how Jacob tried to deal with Esau, right? His own brother. And so, guys are guys, and we do stupid things like that, right? Just think we just lie our way or buy our way out of every problem, right? Yep, not much else to say. The rest of the story is pretty straightforward. Yeah. Of course, the last thing to point out, is the part where at the end of the chapter it points out that basically Joseph was kind of acting like his dad and favoring Benjamin by giving him like 5 times the food portions. So, I mean, the funny thing is that, like, wouldn't Joseph have fed everybody in abundance? I mean, you have to look like a good host, right? So he would have to feed everybody in relative abundance, and then to give your youngest brother 5 times as much, like, does he expect him to just take like a bunch of containers and bring it all home or something? But anyway, it's just kind of interesting that, just really showing that, Benjamin is the favorite, and for the brothers to remember that. And of course, like, there's that bit of irony where, like, I mean, to be fair, it had been 20 years, right? And that's why the time thing is actually important, because if it wasn't like a 20-year time skip, maybe the brothers could have caught on that something was up, instead of just thinking that it was all like divine punishment or something. They might have figured that, like, something is up with this governor of Egypt, right? That he's a lot more, like one of us, right? They might have caught on, but I guess after 20 years of not seeing Joseph, they didn't think that of all things, right? But to be fair, when you sell someone as a slave, I suppose you would never guess they would become the prime minister of a foreign country, right? But what do we know? So anyway, I don't know. I just find it kind of cute where, like, yeah, Joseph kind of acts like his dad, and gives Benjamin the 5 times, even though it's like already excessive as it is, right? I mean, even to give him double portion would have been excessive, and people might have caught on. I mean, sure, we have dramatic irony, right? Where it's pretty quick for us to catch on what's going on. But once again, it's because of dramatic irony, right? We know this is Joseph. The brothers don't know, right? That this is Joseph. But we know, and that's why, like, his behavior, if we were just to read this, you're like, oh yeah, like, whatever, right? But you kind of have to picture how this would look like, as it plays out for the brothers, right? And of course, the Egyptians would have observed this as well. But I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to look at. But there's really not much else to say about it. So, with that being said, we're going to move on to chapter 44. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And so the steward did as Joseph told him. Excuse me. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination?'" For crying out loud. So it's a spam caller. It's not even my local area code. So why bother? Anyway. Where was I? Oh yes. "Why have you repaid?" This is verse 4. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this cup my master's drink from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.'" Then the steward caught up with them, and he repeated the words to them. But the brothers said to him, Why does my lord say such things? Far it be from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my lord's slaves." "Very well," the steward said. "Let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame." And each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this, the brothers tore their clothes, and they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this that you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find out things by divination?" "What can we say, my lord?" Oh, sorry, I need a different voice for Judah. Because if I do that horsey voice too long, I'm going to die. So, "What can we say, my lord?" Judah replied. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves. We ourselves are the ones who was found to have the cup." But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace." Then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, but let me speak a word. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we answered, 'We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's son left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself. And we said to my lord, The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die. But you told your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my lord has said. Then our father said, go back and buy a little more food. But we told him we cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us, then we can go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's, sees that the boy isn't there, he will surely die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all of my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. So, chapter 44. I guess a way to say it is when the game has been played for too long. That is what I would subtext this chapter. Because basically, Joseph takes his little, attempt to get satisfaction a little too far, right? It's one thing when you want recompense for something. It's another, let me word that better. It's one thing when you want recompense for pains in your past. Understandable. We all want that satisfaction in our lives, right? It's another thing when you have to hurt other people in order to get it. And this is where you take the game too far. And this was something Joseph, we don't really know if he really knew how far it would hurt his family to do this. The Bible doesn't tell us whether Joseph did this in full consciousness, because it's safer to say, based on what's not being said, that Joseph just wanted that satisfaction from his brother. He was willing to troll them as long as he could, basically, because Joseph, it gets Joseph off, basically, right? To torment his brothers. And so now, after the whole thing with Benjamin, and I'm just going to turn my mic down a little bit. After the whole thing with Benjamin and, wanting to keep him for himself, the Bible doesn't really tell us if Joseph did in full consciousness how much this would affect his father, right? Because perhaps, come on. Perhaps Joseph is acting out of selfishness at this point, right? That, I got to have that satisfaction no matter what, right? But, you take the game too far if you have to hurt other people to get there. And, this is where we see this big maturity spike in the other brothers, right? Because they realize, no, we will not make our father suffer again, right? We're not going to make our father suffer. And so, but Joseph seems to have forgotten this, right? And there's a bit of an irony, right? Because part of it is because Joseph hasn't seen his father in over 20 years. Despite being Jacob's favorite, Joseph is the one that's willing to hurt his father. Whereas the other sons, they are not willing to hurt him anymore because they probably realize that they've already caused him so much pain. But Joseph, he hasn't seen his father, so he doesn't know, right? And yeah, you can kind of argue the ignorance thing in Joseph's part, but that's why Judah has to say what he does, right? Like, no, if we don't come back with Benjamin, that's it. Our father will die of misery. He'll die of a broken heart, and that would be it for him, right? What else would he have to live for? And so, the story has this interesting irony, right, where the brothers finally understand, right, that their life is not simply in their own hands, right, but rather, you have to trust God in a lot of ways, and you have to be willing to not just think you can do whatever you want, because obviously it can get you in some pretty dicey places, and that's what the brothers had learned after all this time. You would think Joseph would know this, but well, the story kind of suggests that either he does and he doesn't care, or he doesn't actually know because he decided not to think about it, because maybe stress of work or whatever reason you might come up with. But basically, the interesting thing to get from this story is that, like, yeah, Joseph has taken the game too far now, right? Because when he first kind of trolls them about, like, oh, you're spies or whatever, right? And remember, like, Joseph does have full knowledge of who they are, right? As far as his dad's concerned, a little bit less so, because once again, he hasn't seen the guy. But after seeing Benjamin, he should know. You would think that Joseph would know that the state of their father, because he does know that their father is alive. He knows that, and so for him to troll the to continue trolling the family like this, kind of makes you wonder about, like, has Joseph taken it too far? And it's easy to argue that yeah, he has, right? Because if he broke the brothers to that point that the brothers had to decide that no, we are willing to give up our lives for this, right? Because we won't let you hurt someone else, right? And so there's this interesting, like, twist too with the older brothers, that now they kind of act heroic, despite the fact that Joseph is the bigger hero of the story. He the guy saved Egypt, for crying out loud, right? But now the other brothers act heroically here, in that they're not willing to hurt someone else for gain. Unlike Joseph. And I kind of made this joke last week when I talked about how, like, Joseph kind of just intermelded himself with the culture, and may not have been for the best. And it's possible that may not have been for the best, right? Because Joseph doesn't act in this quote unquote truly virtuous way, at least not in this part of the story anyway. But at the same time, I think the story wants to remind us that human beings, we can be fickle and stuff like that, right? And when we act virtuous or not, and the do or die times when you have to act virtuous, and how will you act, because that's what determines who you are. And so that's kind of the interesting part of this story. Basically, the bulk of this chapter is just Judah's monologue about how he explains what had happened to their father, and that how the how do I put it, the state their father is in. Yeah, that's a good word for it. The state that he's in, right? And so it's interesting that they picked Judah, because there is actually a reason for this, but we'll kind of cover that later, because there's this whole thing at the end of the chapter that talks about, like, the fate, if you will, of the sons of Jacob. And of course, there's the funny, like, how much Judah basically submits to Joseph, fulfilling Joseph's dream, right? That, they would bow to him, as well as, like, the sun, the moon, and the stars, representing, you know, even Jacob would bow down to Joseph, kind of thing. And how Judah addresses, well, for formality's sake, for sure, he addresses Joseph as like his Lord Master, right? Because, I mean, one, you're in someone else's land and you should respect their sovereignties, right? And so they got that right. And then, of course, like, he sees that Joseph has this power of life and death over him. And so that's how you would talk to someone like that, right? You would call them your Lord and Master, basically, right? And so it's kind of interesting that, yeah, Judah goes out of his way. And it's not just him, though, because remember, all the brothers go back with him. It's just that Judah is the only one who speaks. But it does show that all the brothers had changed, right? And that they were all willing to give their lives for Benjamin to, they would trade places, right? And of course, you only hear Judah say this, but it's implied that the other brothers would do it. A funny story that has little to do with this story, but I just kind of want to tell it. I'm pretty sure you could look up the song yourself, but I remember when I was a long time ago, I was like in like elementary school or grade school, and we had, the school puts on a school play, and even though you have like your central cast, like, still some of the classrooms will participate in the play in like a music number, and everybody will kind of do like a big group thing. It's kind of weird how I'm not explaining this very well, but anyway, my class at that time got wrapped into this school production, and I was like in like the second grade or something like that, and in the second grade we had to sing this song called "Not Benjamin," and the song was basically this story. And so the idea was that we all had to, even though there was like, we're a whole classroom, so we're like, what, 20 students or whatever, but we're supposed to represent the 10 brothers, right? And they're all saying like, no, take me, right? Not him, take me, no, take me instead. And so all the different brothers would throw themselves, and any one of them to be left behind instead of Benjamin. And so I remember we did this whole musical number around it. It was kind of fun to do. It was a long time ago, though. Like, when I was in second grade, like, geez, it's like StarCraft ages ago. It was a long time, okay? Longer than StarCraft, actually. That's how old I am, guys. So, anyway, yeah, so this is a very important part of the Joseph story, that, the brothers prostrate themselves before Joseph and basically give their lives for their brother Benjamin. But of course, this story is not complete without chapter 45, which is what we're going to read now. Chapter 45. When Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save the lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now. Okay, so there's the time lapse. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you, to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph has to say. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, and do not delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen, and be near to me. Excuse me. You, your children, and your grandchildren, your flocks, and the herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your houses, and all who belong to you, will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him weeping. Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them, do this. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father to come too. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of Egypt will be yours. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts, as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothes, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for the journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said, don't quarrel on the way. Super coy. So the brothers went out of Egypt, and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is the ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived, and Israel said, I am convinced my son Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die. So, chapter 45, the other half of when the game has gone too far. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And just says, alright, gig's up. It is I, Joseph. And it's interesting because Joseph has this super positive attitude, which is kind of weird to read right after he was like trolling them and taking the game a bit too far and almost hurt his father, almost killed his father to an extent. And then now he's saying like, when you guys sold me to Egypt, it was for a greater purpose, right? And, thinking about like destiny and all that stuff, right? And Joseph talks about like destiny basically. He's like, this was destined so that I could save all of us, right? Because of course, there would be how you understand the trajectory of reality, I guess. And if you're a multiverse subscriber, would the land go through famine with or without Joseph? And if Joseph was the only guy that could have saved the world at the time, right, and all that other stuff, right? But at least for the context here, Joseph is saying that, like, yeah, this was for the purpose of me saving all of our lives, basically. You're welcome, right? But yeah, so Joseph reveals himself, and it's funny how the Bible's like, well, the brothers were just stunned. I mean, to be fair, anyone would be if they found out they had lost long family who was now, basically like the top dog, right? And there's even this interesting little note, this little like thing in the text that's kind of it's kind of just, it's weird that it's just there, but there's an interesting implication about stuff that may have happened during the 7 years of plenty. And that is the part where Joseph says, where is it? Hang on, let me find it first. In verse 8, Joseph talks about how he became father to Pharaoh. And so this is a very weird throw-in sentence, but it is very possible that the earlier Pharaoh must have died during the 7 years of plenty. The one that appointed Zaphenath-Paneah, Joseph's other name, his pagan name, if you will. Because, I talked about last week about how ironic that name is, right? But the Pharaoh who promoted Joseph may have died. And so the next in line, would have been, the Prince of Egypt, a peer probably to Joseph. But yet Joseph kind of has his, like, father figure to him, right? Because, Joseph would have worked with the previous Pharaoh. And so there's this implication, at least it's implied, that the last Pharaoh died, and then there's a new Pharaoh in place. And, Joseph is closely associated with his family, right? That he's treated like part of the family. That, he's close to both pharaohs. And that's interesting too. And that's where, like, it's kind of funny. Yeah, sure, like, Joseph is second in command, so he does have a lot of authority. But, like, you think of what he does and the stuff he says to his brothers about, like, how, oh yeah, you guys can have the best land. You guys are going to live in Goshen, right? One of the better parts of Egypt. And you think, like, wow, would Joseph really have the authority to do that? But I think not only would he, it would be easy because he has that connection to the Pharaoh, right? He's not just like the most important employee, but in a way he has become part of the family. And that Joseph is the grand advisor to 2 generations of Pharaoh, even though obviously the second, well, both of them, it was only like the tail end of one and the beginning of the next one, right? But it's interesting that Joseph is already integrated into 2 generations of pharaohs. And so, of course, like, yeah, Joseph actually would have the kind of authority because he is that closely integrated to, like, the pharaoh's family. So that's an interesting thing to think about. At least I thought that was interesting. And I'm just seeing what other things there are to point out. Not much, really. Just, Joseph telling his family that they can move in. And it's funny because, like, when he sends a pickup, basically, for their, for the rest of the families, if you will. He's like, okay, we're going to have all these donkeys, we're going to have carts, and you're going to lug everybody over. It's like, oh, man. just ancient world, like, mass transportation is not easy, right? Because this would have required so much work, right, to organize all this, just to move, like, what, 100, maybe 200 people tops, right? I think the Bible says that there's only like 70 people, so it's not even 100 people. But like the amount of work that goes into transporting 70 people. Just the beauties of modern technology that we found ways to, like, oh yeah, transporting hundreds of people long distances is not hard, right? Sure, it's a little bit expensive. It can be a little bit expensive, but even then, right, it's not anywhere as asinine as how they would have to have done it in the ancient world. The beauties of modern technology. And then, of course, like, see, when you read the Bible yourself, it is one of those things that, like, it's, you kind of just glaze over it when you're reading it, when you're just reading words off a page. It's like you just kind of go over it. But as you notice, as I was reading it out loud, you definitely notice how annoying some of these, like, certain emphasis and, like, for example, the interchanging between, like, Israel and Jacob. And the Bible just, like, goes back and forth, like, yeah, whatever, right? Like, okay, where is it? There's, like, one part where it just shamelessly does it, right? It's like, no. Okay, so at the end of the chapter, it's like, when they, the brothers, told him, Jacob, everything Joseph had said to them. And when he saw that the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Next sentence. And Israel said, I am convinced. It's like, really? Really? It's like, the end of one sentence, Jacob. The beginning of the next sentence, Israel. Talk about the same guy. It's like, oh, come on. But yeah, it's one of those things where, like, why it's annoying to walk around with multiple names, right? And the New Testament doesn't do it as badly because, like, when a guy has, like, multiple names, they usually really stick with one. Like, Peter is a good example, right? Peter is just called Peter most of the time. The only time when he's called Simon is where, like, Jesus actually is, like, serious with him and calls him Simon. Because, of course, like, when he calls him Peter, it's like, my buddy, right? My buddy Peter. But when he's like, Simon! Like, Simon, what the heck? Right? Like, and so, but in here, right, it's way more like just back and forth, like Israel, Jacob, Israel, Jacob. So when I make that discrepancy, you can see why, right? Like the Bible just does it all the time. And it's like, when you're just reading it on paper, you're just reading words on a page, you don't really think about it too much. But when you have to read it out loud, especially when I'm reading it out loud to you, you definitely notice it a lot more, right? So, anyway, that is chapter 45. I realize I'm actually going through this reading part pretty fast. But there's no way I could finish the rest of Genesis in one stream. Because my throat is going to die by like 5:30. So, if I were to keep reading. Because then that would take me up to like 7 o'clock, and we can't have that. Because I gotta do some video editing for something. Anyway, chapter 46. So Israel set out with all that he had, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel. See, it did it again. Spoke to Israel in the vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replied. I am God, the God of your father, he said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. Then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's... See, they did it again. And Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children, along with their wives, in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport them. So Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt, taking with them their livestock and their possessions that they had acquired in Canaan. Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons, grandsons, and his daughters and his granddaughters, and all his offspring. And here we go. These are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his descendants, who went to Egypt. So we got Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob. The sons of Reuben, we got Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. I think that's how you say those. We got the sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi, I don't know why I said that. The sons of Levi, we got Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Sons of Judah, we got Onan, Shelah, Perez, Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. Because remember that was a thing? The sons of Perez, we got Hezron and Hamul. Then we got the sons of Issachar, Tola, Pua, Jashab, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun, we got Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. I think that's how you say that. And these were the sons Leah bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram. Besides his daughter Dinah, these sons and daughters of his were 33 in all. So basically, what the Bible's getting is that, like, because remember, Jacob had like 4 wives. And so with his first wife, there are 33 members of the family, right? We have sons and we have children and grandchildren, right? And when you add all of them, that's 33 people, which is already pretty big. Remember, well, on the one hand, on the one hand, it is like one of the 4 wives, but of course, like, it is also the wife that gave him the most kids, right? Because Leah had like 6 kids, right? So there's a lot of them. And there are 33 of them, apparently. Then we move on to the sons of Gad. Zephron, Hagi, Shuni, Esben, Eri, Erodi, and Areli. And we have the sons of Asher. Are you serious? Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah. And their sister's name was Sarah. Really? How do you got these guys with these weird ass names? Then you have to say, like, oh yeah, their sister's name was Sarah. Why did they all just have simple names? Like, come on, guy. Right? Anyways, we got the sons of Beriah, Heber, and Malchiel. And these were the children born to Jacob by Zilpah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Leah. 16 of them in all. Now the sons of Jacob's wife Rachel, we got Joseph and Benjamin. In Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. The sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gira, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppin, Huppin, and Ard. And yes, those are names. Muppim and Huppim. These were the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 in all. Then finally we have the sons of Dan. Or, sorry, the son of Dan. Dan apparently only had one son. And that was Hushim. Then we have the sons of Naphtali. Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem. And these were the sons born to Jacob by Bilhah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Rachel. 7 in all. So what's that, 33? See, it's not even that many of them. There's like 33, and then plus 16, so what's that, 49? And then 14, 49 plus 14 is 63, plus 7, 70. Then you just add 1 for Jacob. Well, no, you add 1 for Jacob, and you add 3 more for the wives. So what's that? 74 of them. But we have to minus Jacob or Joseph and his family because they already live in Egypt. So what's that? 4, 5 people, 4 people, 4 people. So 70 of them. Okay, so now we're back to 70 basically. So we got 70 people moving into the land of Egypt. Now all those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons and wives, and they numbered 66 persons. The 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the numbers of Jacob's family, which went to Egypt, were 70 in all. Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father, Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." And Joseph said to his brothers, and to his father's households, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh, and will say to him, 'My brothers and my father's household, who were living in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds. They tend livestock. They have brought along their own flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you and asks what is your occupation, you should answer, your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen. For all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." Okay, so yeah, that's chapter 46. I'm just looking if I want to read any more because there is actually like a huge thing where like they talk about, the instructions that the family has to follow. But I think I'll just save it for next week and I'll talk in more detail. But basically what happens here is, excuse me, that they are basically moving to Egypt. And, Jacob's all happy. And it's funny because they make a stop along the way in Beersheba. Because, of course, Beersheba is pretty special. It's a place where he lived for most of his life. And so he's accepted that he's not going to die there. The place he had always called home. And, this is an interesting complete shift in the narrative. Or not really a shift, but it's kind of like it brings back, older parts of the story, right? Where Abraham had to accept he's going to live in a new land and die there, right? You think of like when Adam got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right? He's not going to die where he was born. Because obviously he's not born, he's magically made. And then of course, Cain has to leave his family, so he goes somewhere and dies in a different place. So this is like an ongoing trend, right? Like basically Isaac is really the only guy who died where he was born. Everyone else doesn't, right? They all die in some other place. So that's kind of an interesting thing that happens here. Of course, a lot of chapter 46 is just like, this is the family of Israel. And it just has all of these funny names. I'm yawning a lot because, for some reason, I guess after reading all that, I'm a little bit tired now. And I guess you run out of breath when you've been reading all those funny names for so long. Speaking of funny names, I mean, some of these names are just great, right? Like, the sons of Asher. Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Bariah. And then of course they have a sister with like a super normal name. I don't know. I just find something like that funny. I guess I'm the only weird person that like who finds stuff like that funny. Because it's like, why, right? Why would you do that? And so I don't know. I just thought it was funny that the sister has a totally normal name. And then of course Muppin and Muppim and Huppim. Like, how are those not hilarious names? Like, how do you not get laughed at with a name like Muppim? Muppim. Muppim. How do you not get laughed at with a name like that? Because that is just like, dude, you're just asking to have your kid have a troubled life if you name your kid Muppim. And you know, this is the other thing too. You know, when you read this part and it's like, Benjamin has all these kids already. And yet his dad still babies him. Right? And it's, I mean, obviously ancient world is kind of different how they did things. But like, it just really goes to show like how like overly protective and attached to, when I talked about this, you know, in chapter 42 or chapter 43, where like Jacob is so attached to Benjamin, but yet Benjamin is a grown man with a whole bunch of kids, where he's got like, well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He's got 10 kids, right? Including Muppim and Huppim. But I guess when you're overly baby like that, you're going to come up with weird names. And then you're, you know, just retreat to your dad's authority when people make fun of your kids. I don't know. But it's just weird that you think of like, oh yeah, you know, this favorite son that gets pampered. But it's like, wait a minute. Benjamin's an adult and has been for apparently a while, right? Because he's got like 10 kids, right? I mean, none of, and that's the other thing that's like, you know, when you watch like Bible movies or whatever, right? Everybody's like depicted younger because, you know, we have to use regular younger actors. But like when you read the Bible, it's like all these guys are like super old, right? Like Jacob is like he's hitting like 100 here, right? And everyone is like, wow, like if Benjamin's the youngest and he's like pushing 40, maybe his late 30s. But then of course, how does he have 10 kids so fast, right? That's like his baby mama is just like, you know, spewing babies one after another. That's kind of, ugh, right? And then Joseph only has like 2 kids, but Joseph started late, right? Because Joseph was like a prisoner for like 13 years. You know, he rotted in jail for basically like 13 for the latter part of 13 years. You know, however long it took, however long he was in Potiphar's house first. And of course, there's the 7 years of plenty, the 2 years of famine so far, right? So Joseph's just a late bloomer. But Benjamin is like an adult with kids, and yet Jacob still babies him. Anyway, that's basically it. I talked about the Beersheba thing already. Jacob leaving the land he once knew as home. And the last part I want to talk about, because the only part that actually has anything to do with anything, is this weird part where I mentioned this a little earlier when we were talking about the dinner scene and how the Egyptians would not associate themselves with the Hebrews and not eat with them because they quote unquote found them detestable. And no, it's not just because of racism, but of course there's like certain taboos about other people's cultures. And a big one would have been the fact that a lot of the Hebrews would have been shepherds, right, and keeper of livestock. Now, to be fair, right, before everyone gets like, oh, you know, they're racist or whatever, right, there is obviously like this class, not really a class issue, but it is kind of a class issue, and the taboos that come with like people who have to work really dirty jobs versus people who work much cleaner jobs, if you will. And so people who work dirtier jobs tend to be like, oh, you're kind of treated lower. You just kind of have to deal with it. And before people say, well, we don't do that in the world today, that's a complete lie. I work in security, and I am treated like garbage because I am a lower class, dirty person. Even to, among you people who may work as higher tier, cleaner jobs. If you work as a security guard, we get treated like garbage because we are considered, the lower tier and the dirty people job, right? It's the dirty job, and it is, right? Especially when you got to toss out junkies, right? You have to touch people who are living in garbage. So you are kind of viewed in the same way. You're viewed as a garbage toucher, right? And so in the same way in the ancient world, they had these kind of taboos. And if you're a keeper of livestock, you touch animals, right? And so that's obviously like, oh, you're kind of dirty all the time. Another example is that like my younger brother worked in like a warehouse kind of job, and his hands would always be dirty and rough because you gotta move stuff all around, right? And even if you wear gloves, that doesn't change that much. Like your hands are still gonna get rougher and they're gonna get a lot dirtier. Like you don't know if you can really tell from this picture, but like I have soft hands, right? I have softer hands. But if you look at my brother's hands, he has way more rugged hands than I do. Because I have like little nerd hands, right? Like all I, aside from the odd time I have to punch, a junkie and drag out some homeless bum. Usually, what am I doing? I'm not like working, like I'm not a woodworker or a metal worker. Like my brother is huge on like building stuff, right? I'm not like that. I don't do woodworking. So I pay someone to do it, right? But like, I have softer hands because of that, right? But you think of like a shepherd or something, and they would have had to, they would be a rugged hand kind of job. And if you're an Egyptian, and the Egyptians were one of the superpowers of the world at that time, every job is, if you're not a slave, you usually have like you might be a philosopher or a temple person or whatever, right? And you would be a quote unquote soft hand job. That did not come out right. You have softer hands for your jobs, and so there obviously would have been like, we view you as dirty, and of course there's like taboos about touching animals, right? And it's not exclusive to like the Egyptians, okay? Before people just rip on the Egyptians for this really idiotic thinking. I mean, we do it in the world today, right? Most people, I don't think a lot of girls would find a guy who works in a slaughterhouse particularly attractive, right? It's the same thing. It's the same thing, right? Even in 2020, this kind of discrimination still exists, right? You don't think a woman who works a desk job is going to find a guy who works in a slaughterhouse as an attractive job, right? Not just because of the pay difference. That's not even the issue, because some slaughterhouse workers get paid very well, but it's about like the fact that, oh, this guy just cuts up animals for a living. That's disgusting, right? I mean, I know people that, I know guys that have hard times finding girlfriends because that's the kind of jobs they work. They work like really messy jobs like that. And so it's, on the one hand, like, yeah, in a vacuum, it's wrong to think that way, right? Because someone works a dirtier job, they're less worthy. But at the same time, it's like, I get it, right? I get it. You are justified in the way you think of like, oh yeah, you if you work a nice office job, you're not gonna go for someone who works a job that's dirty on their hands. Oh, sorry. And another example of this is like, I remember when I was younger, and you would read tales of like, in Japanese culture, drum maker. It's ironic, right? A drum is like this really important instrument to be played. Drums have always been an interesting instrument to play. But of course, if you were a drum maker, you were basically like treated like garbage because you had to kill an animal, tan its skin, and then use it to make the drum. So like the maker gets like absolutely no glory, right? only the attractive guy who plays it gets all the glory, right? And it's exactly that kind of thing, right? And this is why, you know, when the Hebrews move into Egypt, back on topic, the Hebrews move into Egypt and they have to be like, well, we have to tell them that we're shepherds because we have to differentiate ourselves from the Egyptians. We can't be around them. Mainly because they and it's funny too, right? Where, you know, these guys are being respectful to the Egyptian culture, right? And so, not that, I mean, it's not like, well, it's funny because like later these same people will oppress them later. But the other thing too is that, like, you know, the Hebrews don't go into someone else's country and expect them to just be like, oh yeah, integrate us fully into your culture and treat us like a complete citizen, right? It's like, no, we're going to segregate and you just got to deal with it. And the Hebrews are like, yeah, fine, we'll deal with it, right? We'll stay out of your ways, you stay out of ours, right? Which I guess is one way of doing things, right? You know, stay out of my way and I'll stay out of yours. And so that's the reason why the Bible brings us up, that like Joseph tells his family, you've got to be, just tell Pharaoh that your guys are shepherds. And so he'll send you to a place where you can live by yourselves and you don't have to worry too much about like the pagan customs of the Egyptians or whatever, right? Because that's the other thing too that's interesting, where like Joseph just rolls with it, right? You know, he gets renamed a pagan name. He marries the wife of a he marries the daughter, sorry, of a priest of a different religion. So Joseph just kind of rolls with it, but he finds a way to be able to spare his family by them not needing to make those same compromises he did. Because as I talked about last week, Joseph cared about saving the lives of people, so he was willing to make those compromises. But at the same time, it's kind of funny where he lets his family find ways out of needing to compromise and assimilate into the new culture, so that they can maintain, you know, the Jewish covenant, or the later to be Jewish covenant, because it's not a Jewish covenant yet, right? It starts becoming a Jewish covenant after they leave, you know, over 400 years later. So, but you know, the covenant that God had made with the Hebrews through Abraham and Isaac, and now in Jacob. And so it's just interesting that like Jacob or Joseph, sorry, finds a way that like they have a loophole. And so like, oh, you don't have to fully integrate into Egyptian culture like I have, because I know you might find it offensive, right? And so this once again brings Joseph into a more virtuous position as opposed to the troll he was earlier. But he is like being extremely, how do I put this? He's extremely kind, and he's virtuous in how he allows them to maintain, you know, the life that they have started to build and their identity with God, right? Whereas Joseph in himself he made compromises because he had to. So it's kind of interesting that there's that dynamic as well. So yeah, that's basically it for chapter 46. And then chapter 47 actually continues that. But I don't want to read that now, because I'm kind of tired. And two, you know, the next week we'll have like no content, because I mean, I just read like for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I read 5 chapters to you. Now we got 4 more left. So if I read another one, then we'd have even less for next week. So that's basically going to be it for the reading portion. I may end the stream pretty soon, unless you have questions to go over. You can talk about it. I will do a bit of housekeeping right now and announcements as you guys formulate questions if you have any. So first one is next week. We'll try and do 5 days again, but Monday might be kind of tight. We'll see. But the streaming schedule for next week will be Monday we'll be reading the second half of Robin Hood. Tuesday, Wednesday, I'll play more Tokyo Mirage. I was gonna say I would try and finish it, but there's no way I'll be able to finish that game in 6 hours. I would need a little bit more time to finish Tokyo Mirage. So I'll be pretty much near the end of Tokyo Mirage by next week, using 2 streams, and then we'll see what I end up doing after that because I'm basically at the end. Next Thursday is Throwback Thursday, where we start the Zerg campaign. Although I think I might try and upload a video where I play the Terran map legit, because I did have to cheat in that map, because that map is super asinine to stream. I just realized, because I was playing the map again, and I was like, dude, man, I'm like already 2.5 hours, and I'm not halfway done this map, right? So I don't know if I even want to finish that project of doing that map legit. Then of course next week we will finish Genesis. Now, looking at this calendar I have here, I'm just looking at the calendar and seeing like how dates are gonna look, because like we're already like we're ankle deep in December. Next week we're definitely knee deep, right? Which means Christmas season is coming up, right? I mean, if you go to the store, there's Christmas lights. They're playing the Christmas music, and I gotta do something a little bit for Christmas. So after next week's reading, and I'll finish Genesis on the 11th. The 18th, for sure, I will be doing some Christmas reading. Christmas reading, right? So I'll probably just read like the Nativity story again and whatnot, which is always fun to do. So I'll do that on the 18th. Thursdays will maintain, StarCraft Brood War, and it will probably go into the new year, because if I play through that Zerg campaign and do it legit the whole way through, which ain't going to be easy, it's going to take a while. That's going to take a while. So StarCraft will easily bleed through into January. As far as what to do after Tokyo Mirage, we'll see. I don't really know. One thing is that I know Taki wants to finish Silent Hill, which is funny because we are more than a month past Halloween, which I originally intended Silent Hill to be like a Halloween project. But I guess I'm going to keep playing it whenever he has time again. And he should be finishing his exam, so maybe we'll just do that for right after Tokyo Mirage. We'll just do Silent Hill. As far as, I do want to read another Christmas-related thing after I read Robin Hood. So I'll finish Robin Hood on the 7th, and then on the 14th I'll do something Christmas-related. The 21st I'll do something Christmas-related as far as reading, probably. We'll see if I do anything else Christmassy. Like maybe when I'm finished Tokyo Mirage on like the 15th or something, we'll do some like snowy games. I don't know. I'm just talking out of my butt at that point. But basically do some Christmas themed things for the Christmas season. Maybe I'll just wear a Santa hat the whole time and call it Christmassy. I don't know. And then the one thing I will kind of do off, like totally warping the schedule, would be, for obvious reasons, on the 25th of December, which is a Friday, I will not be doing a Bible reading stream for obvious reasons. So the 25th, I will take that day off for sure, extra on top of like not streaming on the weekends as I normally do. And then we'll see what we do on the build up to New Year's. Of course, that is looking far into the future. So let's just take it week at a time, right? So next week will be pretty regular schedule. That's for now, right? Next week's pretty regular. Robin Hood, Tokyo Mirage, StarCraft Brood War, finishing Genesis. That's next week's schedule. The other little announcement I have to make is that I will be doing another kind of video on this channel. I will start doing some other uploads. And the only real reason is because like there are some games I want to play and do like talk about the story and stuff like that. But let's be real, I've already crammed a lot of stuff into these streams, right? Like Tokyo Mirage already eats so much time. And then like StarCraft obviously eats its own, like it has its own thing, right? So I'm going to do another Let's Play, or I should say I'm going to be doing this channel's first Let's Play. And keep your eyes peeled for that, because I will probably upload the first episode possibly tonight, because I'm going to actually start working on it. Like the editing stuff. Editing. It's not going to be that much. just a little bit of editing right after I finish the stream. So that's kind of, keep your eyes peeled for that, and I hope you guys will definitely check that out when it comes around. And that will be a little like December project too. I'll do this regular video upload for this series that I'm doing. And with that being said, that's all I have to say for housekeeping. Housekeeping is done. If you don't have any questions, this is going to be the end of the stream. And I'm looking at like the camera thing here. I can just see like, holy moly, I didn't shave, so like I look so scruffy. I haven't shaved for like three days. I basically like shaved at the beginning of this week, so I haven't shaved since like 5 days basically. So this is what I look like 5 days later. Like, I'm not so bad. Like, I know some guys that like need to shave like, how do I put it? They shave like every day. Some guys even like multiple times a day. That's rough, dude. If you're at that point in your life, you gotta shave multiple times a day, or you're just the kind of guy who grows that much facial hair. Like, this is how much I grow in like 5 days, and of course I'm gonna shave it because, like, look how bad it looks, right? And the main reason is because like it's really blotchy, especially when you look at my cheeks here. Then the facial hair gets really blotchy, and it looks so bad. So, but obviously by Monday I'll be clean shaven again. So, anyway, this is gonna be the end of the stream. I hope you guys enjoyed going through Genesis, and I will see you guys on Monday for a reading stream, reading more Robin Hood, or you might catch my video tonight when I start uploading a Let's Play on here. So, with that being said, I hope you guys have a good night, and God bless you.